The mounting debt crisis in Italy is sending shockwaves across Europe, with the EU still grappling with Greece's financial woes. So just what's next for the Eurozone? Some say, is radical change the only way forward? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm James Bays. When you first hear the headlines, you may perhaps think today is Groundhog Day, a European country in trouble, its economy trying to avoid a bailout. Over the past 2 years, crisis has hit Greece, Ireland, Portugal and Spain. Now, though, it's different. This time the country in the firing line is Italy, the third largest economy in the Eurozone. It may now need a bailout, but its debts are more than all of those countries we mentioned, Greece, Ireland, Portugal and Spain combined, a total of a staggering 1.9 trillion euros. That's $2.6 trillion. If Italy needs a bailout, where's the money going to come from? And is the tipping point for the whole Eurozone now close at hand? Despite Italy's Prime Minister saying he'll resign once an austerity plan is pushed through, the IMF remains cautious, saying there simply isn't enough information about what will happen in Italy in the future. German Chancellor Angela Merkel made her feelings clear on what needs to be done, saying the EU needs treaty reform to survive the debt crisis. She said, "It's time for a breakthrough to a new Europe, a community that says, regardless of what happens in the rest of the world, that it can never change its ground rules. That community simply cannot survive. I'm convinced of this. Because the world is changing so much, we must be prepared to answer the challenges. That will mean more Europe, not less Europe." And French President Nicola Sarkozy spoke of further integration in Europe. He said, "There are 27 of us. Clearly down the line, we'll have to include the Balkans. There'll be 32, 33, 34 of us. No one thinks that federalism, total integration, will be possible with 33, 34 or 35 states." He went on to say, in the end, clearly there'll be two European gears, one gear towards more integration in the Eurozone and a gear that is more confederal in the Eurozone. For more on this, I'm joined by our three guests. From Rome, Nicola Rossi, economist and senator in the Italian Parliament. From Brussels, Georgi Gotev, senior editor of Euractiv, an online European news service. And from London, Adam Myers, senior market strategist for the French bank Crédit Agricole. Well, let me start with you, Adam. Let me take up first the trigger to the latest part of the problem, and that, I believe, is yields in the Italian bond market going over 7%. Explain that in layman's language. Why is that important?
Well, the 7% level is important for no other reason than purely a time value of money reason. Every 5 years at 7%, your debts double. And so your interest rate cost spirals out of control at that level and means your debts are unmanageable.
But Georgi, 7%, I believe, is the figure where the other countries all ran into problems.
Exactly, but now we keep our fingers crossed. There are good news coming today. Good news from Greece, where there is a new Prime Minister, Mr. Papademos, who is a well-respected economist. There are very serious rumors of Mario Monti becoming the Prime Minister of Italy, also a very respected economist, the first choice Prime Minister, I would say, in both cases. So let's see how markets react, and if the price of the money Italy borrows will go up or down. I hope it will go down.
Nicola Rossi, can I just get your view on this 7% figure? I know the governor of the Italian central bank has said that Italy can live with 8%. What's your view on that?
7% is already a worrying figure, for the simple reason that with 120% of GDP debt, that means that servicing the debt would require each year something like 8 to 9% of GDP. That means that if Italy grows, say, at 3%, revenues should exceed expenses by 5 or 6%, which is not easy to achieve. So 7% is already a worrying figure. However, it seems to me that recent developments in the bond market have actually gone in the right direction, because the spread over the difference in returns over the GDP bonds have gone down during the day, and so probably will the return on Italian bonds. This is due to the fact that Italy is reacquiring some credibility and it will reacquire some credibility if the political crisis ends soon and well, as we expect.
Adam Myers in London. We're talking about Italy this time. We seem to have had this conversation many times before, though, about other troubled countries in the Eurozone. Why is Italy more worrying? Why is Italy different?
Well, Italy is different purely from the point of view that it is 5 times the debt of Greece. And of course, if Greece was going to cause ramifications for the banking industry as a whole, not only in Europe but globally, then Italy is a far more dangerous problem.
Georgi, some people have said Italy too big to fail, but also too big to bail out.
Exactly. The European Union has put in place a bailout fund. However, it is not certain that this bailout fund will be sufficient both for Greece and for Italy. Not today, in any case.
Nicola Rossi, are the challenges now only economic for Italy, or are there still big political challenges? You're a senator. I believe your Senate in the next 24 hours is going to have to look at this austerity programme.
No, we will, the Senate as well as the lower chamber will approve the last act, so to speak, of the previous government by Saturday. In my view, what will happen next is that the next government, I believe headed by Mr. Monti, as far as we know up to now, will be ready to enact a full program in order to lower the Italian debt and regain the right path for public finances in the next couple of years.
You say the next government headed by Mr. Monti, but he hasn't been chosen yet. Isn't that going to be the next crisis, trying to decide that he's the man?
No. What happened actually is that yesterday the head of the state gave a hint of what would be his choice by naming Mr. Monti senator. And that means that actually Mr. Monti in some sense has been already tipped. Already this is not official. And we will be waiting until, say, I would say Sunday or Monday for, in order to be sure that this is the track, that the path that we will follow in the next few days. But up to now, what the Italian political world is discussing is exactly this, the possibility of a new government headed by Mr. Monti.
Georgi Gotev in Brussels. In that city, you know Mr. Monti well, don't you? Tell us something about him.
He has been commissioner twice. He has been responsible for internal market and also for competition policy. And believe me, these are the most difficult dossiers. He knows Brussels inside out. Brussels knows him. I think Brussels admires him. I think everybody is keeping their fingers crossed here in Brussels. So Mario Monti will be the Prime Minister of Italy. That would be a very powerful political signal.
Adam Myers, how would the markets react, do you think? And how much do you think the markets believe the problem was a Berlusconi problem?
Well, I think the short answer is very little. The problem is, of course, structural. There are significant debts, and whether we are talking about the leadership in Greece or the leadership in Italy, the underlying concern is still that the voters may not accept any decisions that are put in front of them in terms of austerity in any case. And of course, investors globally are aware of that. And so even if these positive issues are resolved in terms of leadership in both countries, it still does not mean that investors will not still take a very pessimistic view of the underlying problem, and that, of course, is those countries' indebtedness.
Nicola Rossi in Rome. If Mr. Monti is chosen, it follows a pattern. We have Mr. Papademos, who has just become the Greek Prime Minister, 2 technocrats. But isn't there a problem in all this? If you start replacing elected politicians with technocrats, you lose touch with the people. And these technocrats have got to impose some very, very tough measures.
Look, as Mr. Monti recently said, knowing things does not harm. So, I mean, I'm not sure. The point that has to be understood is that simply the person of a technocrat and simply the person of a knowledgeable man does not solve the problem. Those that say that the Italian problem presently is the high level of debt are quite right. The problem is that the first thing you have to do in order to face that problem and, for example, to approve a further austerity program is credibility. Credibility inside the country, credibility of the country outside. And certainly a person like Mr. Monti can help in this respect. But there is a further point which is quite important, and it is the same thing in Italy and in Greece. The program has to be approved beforehand by all political forces. And this is exactly the challenge of these hours.
Georgi, do you think there's a problem in a disconnect between these technocrats and the people and the prospect of fresh unrest on the streets of Athens and Rome, for example?
Well, let's face it. I mean, both prime ministers, I hope that Mr. Monti will be prime minister, and Mr. Papademos are indeed technocrats, but they will lead transitional governments. There will be early elections in both countries. I think the early elections are, this is a campaign period, so this is a time for the politicians to present their projects and for the people to vote. I don't see a problem of democratic deficit. I think that what people realize today is that they need leaders who are knowledgeable. Mr. Papandreou, the former Greek prime minister, is a very likable leader. In Brussels, many of us journalists, we like him very much, but even himself, he confessed that before becoming prime minister, he didn't know what is a credit default swap. You know, ordinary people don't need to know that, but a prime minister needs to know inside out economics these days.
Adam Myers, fresh elections are not going to be that far off, we're hearing from Mr. Gotev. Does that, do you think, going to calm the markets when they hear of elections? Surely that means uncertainty on the way.
Yes, I believe it means uncertainty. Of course, there are many voters out there that are already unhappy, and the longer this problem continues without a solution, as we saw with the Greek shock of a referendum the week before last, leaves Europe in a very precarious position and leaves voters in a very uncertain position, and lastly, leaves taxpayers in a very uncertain position.
Adam, are there some dangers we don't know about? I know your own bank today said its third quarter profits were down 65% because of exposure to Greek debt. What about exposure to Italian debt? Should we be worried about banks now?
Absolutely. I think the banking crisis is an issue that is going to evolve over time. Of course, this initially as a global financial crisis started with banks. It moved on to sovereigns because they were responsible for bailing out the banks, and now of course we've returned to a banking crisis because those banks were holding government bonds. So at the moment we have an interesting position where banks are in a position where they need to deleverage. And to explain that in simplistic terms for viewers at home, assets are the loans that banks give to people, and their liabilities or their capital are of course the shareholders' equity and the deposits that they have in their bank accounts. If there is any form of deleveraging that needs to take place, it neither has to happen in terms of a cut in loans, which of course will be negative for the economy, or it needs to come via a cut in liabilities or capital. And that usually comes from people's bank accounts. And when that happens, you have a contraction in the money supply and you have a contraction in economic growth. So it's bad news either side of the balance sheet for banks and the broader economy.
Senator Nicola Rossi, are you worried about Italian banks?
Well, certainly we are, because Italian banks are among the major owners of Italian bonds. So it is quite obvious that one needs to be worried. But as I said, in my view, we still have a very small window in order to take all those measures that need to be taken right now in order to lower the level of Italian debt and to restore a healthy state for public finances. It seems to me, you know, that Italy has two major strength points which are not fully understood. The first one is that the state owns a large number of assets that can actually be sold in order to lower the public debt. Second, the level of public expenditure in Italy is very high. It is above 50% of GDP and can be lowered substantially in order to have revenues exceeding expenses in the next few years so as to service in debt. So there are the potential for putting Italy on the right track is there.
But you talk about a small window to do it. Georgi in Brussels,
yes.
If this doesn't happen, if they don't manage to do this, where is the bailout money going to come from?
$1 million question. In any case, when we talk about banks, I will name one leader who is very worried about his banks, and that's French President Nicola Sarkozy. French banks hold a lot of the Italian debt, and Mr. Sarkozy has elections next spring, and he's afraid of losing the AAA credit of his country. That would be a disaster for him before the elections. So there are economic problems, but also political problems, all mixed up. I think that, as usual, the European leaders have been very good at finding solutions. I expect the EU leaders to meet soon for a summit in Brussels, an extraordinary summit of the Eurozone, and to find again a solution. Prime Minister Cameron spoke of the big bazooka. I think EU leaders really have to pull out the big bazooka. It appears that the solutions until now were looking more like a water pistol rather than a big bazooka.
Adam Myers in London, what is the big bazooka and where is the money for it going to come from?
Well, the big bazooka really comes in two forms, and I think eventually both may be used. The first, as Angela Merkel has already suggested, requires treaty change, and it is a movement of the European Union towards some form of fiscal federalism. That is, of course, where nations as a whole monitor each other's fiscal positions, and of course they dictate terms in terms of budget deficit size and speed of acquisition of foreign debt. So that's the first potential bazooka, but of course that takes a long time. EU treaty change at the supranational level, constitutional change at the national level takes some time, and of course that is something that markets don't seem to be giving leaders at the moment. Bazooka number two, if that's what you'd like to call it, is of course something that the Federal Reserve has already initiated. It is something the Bank of England is doing as well, and that of course is currency debasement or quantitative easing. I think it really does look like now that if the speed of the market deterioration continues, the ECB will be left with very little choice but to enact unsterilised purchase of bonds, which is essentially, of course, is printing money and following the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England in doing so.
Nicola Rossi in Rome, the ECB should print more money. Your view on that?
Let me first point out that every country, Italy first, has to do fully its own work. Second, however, a much greater and deeper integration of Europe is desperately needed right now and should not be considered as a bazooka if things get worse. It should be on the table of all major governments right now today because it is obvious that Eurozone cannot work if there is no European government of the economy. That also entails possibly different duties for the European Central Bank, but that is possible only if the different countries have gone in the right track on their own, and secondly, if Europe has got a different institutional architecture.
Georgi Gotev, that's going to be deeply politically unpopular, isn't it, in Germany?
Indeed, Germany opposes giving more firepower to the European Central Bank. I think that Germany is haunted because of its history the memories of hyperinflation. When you print money, then you have inflation and hyperinflation, and in the 1930s, that's what brought Hitler to power. But I think that a solution would be found using, including the European Central Bank as a firepower in the absence of other means. I think what leaders need to do is indeed boost the European bailout mechanism to the tune of 1 trillion, as they promised to do so when they last met on the 26th of October. And in general terms, Europe has been moving forward from crisis to crisis, and each major crisis can also be a quantum leap. So Europe is becoming more federal, thanks to the lessons learned from those crises. I expect that the Eurozone will become something which will start looking like an economic governance as a fiscal union, and Europe will make more sense.
Adam Myers, changes to the way the Eurozone operates, changes to possibly the members of the Eurozone. Is that what the markets want to see?
Absolutely. Ultimately, I think that when the European project was conceived, a stronger form of fiscal federalism should have been in place. And of course, if the originators of that plan had foreseen the problems that were coming, they would have put those measures in place very early on. So I think markets are very happy to see any form of coordination or extra fiscal federalism measures that are put in place over the next couple of years. But of course, that takes time. And between now and then, I think one of the only measures that are really available is to use the ECB. And I think that's where we're headed at the moment.
Nicola Rossi in Rome, structural changes all take a very long time in the European Union, don't they? We're going to have ratifications by all the countries, possibly even referendums. This will take a long time.
It is true. Usually structural changes in the European Union take a very, very long time. However, please notice that in these months, few important changes have already happened. Italy, for example, has been, I would say, almost dictated the things that should be done by the European Union. I presently do not take those things as a limit to democracy, because I consider that also the citizens of France, of Germany, of Spain, and all the other European countries have something to say about the evolution of the Italian economy. So I don't feel it as a limit to democracy, but I regard it as a first step toward the much needed stronger coordination in the European Union than one would like to see soon.
All the while, Georgi, there is talk, fresh talk, of looming recession. How worried should we be?
Well, we should worry. I mean, voices like economist George Soros warn of a 10-year period of hardship, recession for the Eurozone. There are worries that maybe the credit will sort of dry up because of the ongoing bank recapitalization, which has been decided by EU leaders very recently. Yes, there are such worries. However, the major challenge is to keep the Eurozone crisis under control.
Adam, the risks of recession,
Greece.
they just actually make it harder, don't they, for all these troubled countries to repay their debts. We actually have a spiralling problem here.
Well, absolutely. Of course, cyclical indicators like the taxation payment system and social security, of course, work in reverse and are meant to buffer the economy. As we go into recession, the tax take of the government will fall. It'll deteriorate in terms of a fiscal position and make the government's debts that much harder to repay. And so, yes, recession, no question, is going to make the problem more difficult for governments. But of course, it's going to make the problem far more difficult for banks as well. And that's a very important issue which must be remembered.
A very complex subject. Thanks to all our guests in Rome, Nicola Rossi, in Brussels, Georgi Gotev, and Adam Myers in London. What do you think of the problems in the Eurozone? Please email your thoughts to insidestory@aljazeera.com. What should we discuss next on this show? Please send your ideas to that very same address. I'll see you in 24 hours' time. Bye for now.